The first question was around, would you consider battery storage as part of the whole house retrofit? It's a question for me. There's a number of questions on those. I'm going to come back to you with answers on that, and I'll feed them back via the Energy Catapult team. So we'll make sure we take your emails at the end and we'll send them out. Instinctively, 20 days into the job or 21 days into the job, I don't understand why we wouldn't be considering battery systems as part of an integrated whole house approach. But I will just go back and check with our policy team as to whether we are doing that. So my sense is yes, but I will come back with some absolute clear guidance. There's a question from Ron Loveland on the current and future respiratory pandemics. Are we growing concern about the need for fresh air and open windows? And are there any thoughts from Bays on this? I think, again, I'm not the expert in this. I will come back to you with a proper answer, Ron. But clearly, it's at top of everybody's agenda. So we need to find a way of ventilating, not just making houses super efficient, because that is going to be a problem. A question from Philip for me, is there any work being done by the registered providers and engaging effectively with the investor and financial sector? And how is this financial investment element being addressed either in ERIS or by the SHDF? So there are a number of other deals out there. There's a thing called the Green Deal Finance or Green Finance Deal, which is being put together, which I think, again, happy to come back with some explicit guidance on or advice on. In the first instance for the SHDF, and I didn't make it clear earlier on, this is a £50 million grant scheme where we are looking for some match funding from local authorities, social housing providers in a consortia, up to the limits of the state aid maximum. The final policy for the main scheme, on whether the main scheme will be a pure grant or whether we're actually looking for some kind of finance, is still open to debate, and I'm working that through with other policy colleagues now, so I understand it. But any insights that you have about how we leverage other finance deals? We had a decent chat from that earlier on.
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there. I was just gonna put in an ad for the Green Finance Institute work, which is sponsored by Bays as well, I think, on financing arrangements for retrofits. So they released a report earlier this year, and that looks at alternative financial arrangements and means of piloting that. And that's certainly something we were involved in, and I think a number of other people are looking at financial solutions and solutions throughout, and certainly us as housing providers are thinking about that as well, about ways we can pilot different financial arrangements.
So thanks, Will. I have already asked the question internally. This is me learning, drinking from the fire hose. It's a naval expression, but I'm trying to get myself up the pace and the learning curve as quickly as I can. The demonstrator fund itself is, as I say, it's a relatively modest start, but what we're trying to do from that is really shape how we take forward the main fund, and bringing in really good, clear guidance on how housing providers can leverage appropriate financing deals, I think is absolutely fundamental to the way we design the main fund scheme. There is a question around whole house retrofit being the most efficient and complete solution, but most organizations have ad hoc component replacements over multiple years and the substantial cost and depreciation. You know, it's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that. My last job was looking after warships, where we also had a very similar dilemma in trying to coordinate major upkeeps every 6 years with components reaching their end of life, and so we didn't avoid investing too soon or not getting the maximum return on the investment. So it's a cracking question. I don't know the answer, but I will come back with some guidance subsequent to this. Kenny, you asked a question about will these new approaches support landlords who smart charge existing electric storage, heating and hot water systems and align it with the renewable generation? There are 460 social housing homes that can have these decarbonisation and fuel poverty alleviation benefits. My straight answer is I don't know. I'm not smart enough on this yet. I apologise, but please recognise that I'm getting up to speed pretty quickly. I'm very happy to go away and look at that question and come back with some more detail. And then finally, there's a question from Nigel Banks for me, which is around the £50 million slide, 2,200 homes equates to £22,000 a home. I think we are looking with the match funding to allow the whole house retrofit costs to be greater than that, and we expect them to be greater than that in some cases. So perhaps up to £60,000 per house with the match funding. So I think that's where we anticipate going. And part of the guidance for the demonstrator fund will be exposing how a local authority and consortia can put together a value for money proposition that demonstrates not just the cost that perhaps at the start of an investment, but also what that cost trajectory is moving forward. I think I mentioned one of the key points for this whole scheme is to try and create that environment where we make better value for money or better investments and make the money for the main fund go further. And we need to be able to do that by demonstrating with as much evidence as we can that taking this approach actually does lead to those economies of scale and allows us to scale it up appropriately. Those are the questions that I had for me so far. Thanks, Graham, for putting those together. I'm happy to run around to Tom Hartland.
I can only spot the SAP of 96 specifically that's come through as a question to me. It must have been I've done such a sterling job in my presentation or included so few details people couldn't pick it apart. I don't know which angle to take, but on the SAP 96, I did go away and beaver into the sort of report done by SUS Housing. So that was the carbon baseline exercise, and that was one of the provocations that came out the back of it. And that is a new build target. So we'd have to bring our existing stock up to 86 and new builds up to a SAP of 96 to position us where we would want to be in a Hail Mary, go for everything approach. That was still left on the table, and it was quite a clever sandwich approach between a do nothing, do something, and do everything with representative costings for each option. And we're still kicking around, where do we draw the line? Is it going for that Hail Mary with the 96%? Is it something a bit more conservative? And that's where the principles have come in. But the work group around the SAP 96 is, an ambitious and aspirational. What would we need to do? Who would we need to work with? What is the scale we would need to go at to reach that SAP 96 target in our new builds?
So Matt, there's a couple of questions that are coming around consumers that you may have missed off because I sent you a second email. Do you want me just to read those out, and then maybe you could fill them, because I think they're pretty relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Pitch them out.
So we've got the consumer wants from Philip. There is an ongoing assumption throughout the presentations that the consumer will accept everything being proposed. For Bays particularly, but others too. What work has been done in respect of the homeowner, who at the moment will be subject to all the solutions proposed? At the simplest level, has anyone asked them what solutions they would support and like to see come forward? Now, I know, Tom, you've done some work on this. So
yeah, I mean, in the previous projects we've had, it's a bit of ambivalence towards the actual technology that we've encountered, in terms of no one's reaching out for a ground source heat pump or biomass boiler or communal heating. If you're a resident or a customer, you tend to think very isolated in your terms. So smart local energy systems isn't necessarily something that's on your agenda. The main thing that's come through is, I don't want my thermal comfort to be impacted, and I don't want to be disadvantaged or be able to misuse a system. So if a system is unduly complex and someone is struggling to get the best out of it, I mean, this goes back to we keep going back to telling everyone how to use their heating properly. But if it's not intuitive, then it's a huge design flaw. If we're creating the opportunity for people to misuse heating systems we're putting in because of their complexity, that's what's going to happen. We shouldn't make it a training need. We should make it a design need within the product. The other thing is, and this is part of the work with the energy systems catapult, we noticed the same trend, is where customers, potentially more vulnerable customers as well, are in using these new novel technology that we've been putting in the heat in the properties, things like zonal heating control. It hasn't actually resulted in a cost saving for them. They've made a cost saving, but they've invested it into better, more comfortable heating in their home. So while we go and say everyone's looking for cheaper energy, the real world finding was everyone looking for cheaper energy so they can heat their homes better to suit their thermal comfort. So money wasn't the bottom line for them. Might be useful insight to take away, even in their more vulnerable customers.
Okay, we've got time for just one more final question, just to let everyone know that we'll try and attempt to respond back to all the questions when we publish the material. So hopefully we'll cover everybody. But there's one question that came out again about the consumers. How many of these retrofit projects have been completed with customers living in situ throughout the works, or have decant management and costs been accounted for on the programme and costs? This is a huge potential rent loss should full decants be required. I'm assuming I'm looking at Joanne or Will or.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer for us. I mean, our last deep retrofit projects were finished a couple of years back with a bit of battery storage and PV and external wall station. There was no decant required for them. But yeah, it's definitely an issue, particularly for our older properties, where we would look at like internal, you know, if we're looking at internal wall insulation or solutions like that that have an internal impact, we would prefer not to have residents decanted, and this is difficult to do. But I think that should be an aim of the projects and of the technologies to be able to do this without a decant impact. So yeah, that's a challenge. There are some blocks where we are doing decants for larger projects where we could do more substantial dimensions, but they're the minority.
It's a real shame. We're probably getting to a point where we could have a real debate now, and we've all warmed up and ready to do it. Joe, just give us your perspective very quickly, and I'll hand back to Max. We're running out of time.
One of our criteria for all of our retrofits was to not decant because of just the whole impact that it has on people's lifestyles as well. You know, if you move people away from their schools, their family, their support systems, it's critical for their living. So we've chosen solutions to keep people in their homes. We've done internal wall insulation and it's worked. I think the critical thing is the planning stage, and to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and when they should be doing it, and the interaction with occupants can be minimised if that happens.
Thank you very much. Back to Matt, just to sum up and finish for us.
So thanks very much, everybody. And this is my first experience of a webinar in this job. I will just say great thanks to the ERIS team and SLES and Anna and Gordon for putting all this together. I think we've heard some really insightful briefs from both the providers, the government, and also the suppliers and the technology aspects. I think you bring it all together, and there's quite a rich mix there. I will endeavour to try and create a forum for people to help us shape the government policy, and particularly for the future schemes. The demonstrator scheme will be out hopefully relatively soon, as I say, by the launch day on the 30th of September. And then we will have an opportunity to fettle some of that guidance as we go through. But actually the big prize here is the main fund, and if we get that through the spending review, then the opportunity to try and create the environment that leverages things like the work Joe Patterson and the team down in Cardiff have been doing, like, you know, the work that we've heard with both Clarion and Bromford and in Northern Ireland. You know, these are really extraordinary opportunities, and how we create the conditions for success there to head towards our net zero target is really critical. And what I would super want to do is make sure we leverage all the insight that you clearly have got, and including those who've listened in today, to make sure we can put that into our guidance. So from me to everybody who's joined today, thank you very much. And if you have specific further questions, please forward them to Gordon, and we will attempt to answer them in relatively short order.